Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is February 2nd, 2025. Welcome to Laughter Salon number 34, I Am Wake. So the great rock Dadaist Captain Beefheart, his name's Don Van Vliet, was a literature guy. He liked Nabokov and Larkin. And my friend was interviewing him and says, "So what do you think of Joyce?" And he goes, "Joyce who?" So a shopper walks into an antique store and says, "What's new?" Well, it's James Joyce's birthday, and we're celebrating 143 years of this person's presence in the multiverse. Ain't nothing but a party. But I'm sorry, probably you guys didn't get the memo. It got delayed. So we're switching the book we're talking about to Mad Magazine's Snappy Answers to Stupid Questions. Well, I'm glad you're all smiling because that's a joke, and I'm just kidding. But as you all know, there's no such thing as kidding. Ha ha ha. So the first question round robin will go to Peter. Thank you, Peter, Sam, Roy, Tim, and Finn. Peter, fill in the blank. I am wake. I'm going to do it first as an example. Fill in the third word. I am, and mine is funky. Fun is the key. I am, fill in the blank. Peter.
Sorry, the question is just I am blank and just fill it in?
Yeah, so the line in the wake named our salon is I am wake. So it can be an adjective, a verb, a noun, or whatever. So the word you're filling is the third word. I am
stoked.
Sam.
Multi.
Roy.
I am woke.
Tim.
I am repeat.
Now that's what I like because I said 1 to 3 to 4 words. Okay, Finn.
Punk.
P-U-N-K?
Punk wake.
Dig it, dude. That's fun. Okay, so the next one is
Miss Sam.
No, yeah, I was quick.
Sam, what was yours again? Stoke.
Multi.
I'm sorry.
Peters was Stoke. Sorry. Okay. I'll remember to forget as Mr. Joyce taught me. Okay, so what was the tipping point? We'll start with you, Finn. What was the tipping point where you choose? It's twofold question to be a Joycean or a Wakean. I mean, where in your life where you went, okay, this is my calling to follow this dude, or go ahead.
Owl Bookshop, Kentish Town Road. It's still there, the Owl Bookshop. It's one of those lovely, you're not part of a big chain, just a private bookshop. And I went in there. I was already reading lots of Joyce, and I took Finnegans Wake off the page, and I flicked through the pages, and I saw the equilateral triangle in the middle of the book, and I thought, what the hell? How can a novel have an equilateral triangle in the middle of it? And circles. I love it. I'm going to be a Wakean. Stuff this Joycean malarkey. No.
Yay! All right. Okay, Tim, you're up. That's being concise and articulate, Finn. Thank you, Tim.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, I'm not going to be as concise and articulate as Finn.
That's
certainly
all right.
not as concise. I have no idea how I got here. I mean, when I was an undergraduate, I remember going home for, I think, a break in the term, and I met a friend of mine from high school, and he was baffled because he was taking English class, and I was not taking English courses. I was taking fine arts courses and calculus courses, and much to the chagrin of all my academic advisors. But this friend of mine showed me a story that he had to write an essay on. He was baffled as to what to make of it. This story called Two Gallants. And I read it, and I was really impressed by it. And so I helped him think through his essay. And that was my introduction to James Joyce. So it was weirdly that I wound up translating Joyce my first time to someone else. And I think that's kind of what we do. I don't want to say explicating, because that's a slightly different thing, but translating the Wake, and somehow you just, you're swept away by the river run, and I've just never gotten off the ride.
Really good, Tim. Are you more Wakean or more Joycean?
Well, I mean, that's probably for someone with greater psychiatric training than I have to do. It's like asking which ward do you belong in, Sam always says that that Vincent Dean, for example, is a notorious sort of case. If you want to taxonomize Joyceans, there are, within Joyceans there are Wakeans, and then within the Wakeans there's Vincent Dean.
Very good. Two things I want you to recall. The great John Cage would be asked a question. He goes, I wouldn't want it. That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer. And yeah, that was good, because this guy interviewed on my podcast the other day. He goes, I asked him a question. He goes, am I supposed to answer that? Okay, Roy, you're up.
Well, I remember that my friend who I grew up next door to, we were into comic books together, and I remember when he discovered Ulysses, I just noticed some change in him, and I remember trying to read it and say, this is impossible to read. I can't do this. And then I remember waking up in the middle of the night thinking, well, if I read really, really slowly, maybe I could have a shot at it. And so that's when I started reading slowly and painfully, and I lost my ability to enjoy reading after that. Joyce ruined it for me.
He ruined it. Thank God. I love that attitude, but I know it didn't ruin it in a bad way. But Roy, more Wakean or more Joycean?
Yeah, I cannot distinguish between those two things.
All right. Okay, Peter, you're up.
Okay, so for me, I started reading Joyce around like 2007, 2008, and it was because I had been reading a lot of Joseph Campbell, and he kept mentioning Joyce, and I didn't know anything about Joyce, and I had thought when I heard the name, or I'd read the name James Joyce, I thought he was a painter. Maybe because of the name of the book, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I just thought he just sounded like a painter. And I kept looking into it more, and then I read Portrait and I read Ulysses, and the momentum was taking me to the Wake, and I was really kind of like, nah, if I start reading that, I'll never stop. I know it'll take over my whole life, because it's just, there's just so much to it, and there's so many supplemental texts and things. And around that time, actually, that's when I went to your group, Jerry. That really helped me become a Wake maniac. And then picking up John Bishop's Book of the Dark in a bookstore, and just at that time I hadn't read the Wake yet, but just flipping through it and seeing those etymological charts he made and the maps that he made, I just kind of knew then, like, I'm very interested in Ulysses, but the Wake is a whole other universe that is going to take over. And I think that's how I became a Wakean.
Yeah, but you do some Ulysses reading with us, and you're going to do Melville. More Wakean or more Joycean, Peter?
I guess more of a Wakean, I guess it would have to be. I'm very interested in the subject of Ulysses versus Finnegans Wake among the Joyceans. But yeah, I think I'm probably more of a Wakean.
Thank you, Peter. Sam, you're up.
I guess it goes back to my last year in college. I hadn't read any Joyce, and had structured my final year that I was just more or less, the other classes I was taking were easy, so I could devote myself to my the senior dissertation, and the senior dissertation was due a month before everything else. So I found myself in early April. Pretty much all my work for the rest of the year was done. Pretty much all of my friends still had work to do. And after a few days, no one really wanted to hang out with me anymore. So I had to find some way to occupy myself. A friend of mine who graduated the year before had read Finnegans Wake and was talking about just how complicated it was and how it sort of the culmination of all the things we'd be reading and were interested in. So that led me to pick up a copy of Finnegans Wake, and yada, 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 here I am.
Mm-hmm.
More Wakean or more Joycean?
I mean, I guess for the last few years more Joycean than Wakeian, but I mean I would like to sort of redress that balance for the next few years now.
Cool.
Cool.
Really good, gentlemen. I am so impressed and so honored that you guys are all here. So I've learned that the Wake is satirizing the information overload we live in. And you pretty much all attend Finnegans Wake reading groups. And, I think Joyce invented Deep Seek and disguised it as a book. And he invented Zoom, if not. I mean, Zoom is the epitome of the Finnegans Wake Reading Club. How can we do it with no content? That's the question. If there's no content in the Wake, then how does this happen? We're thinking there's content. And of course, that's something I contend. Like one friend says, I'm content with saying there's no content in the Wake. And we all know what I'm saying is utter bullshit, but it is funny because there's two things that Joyce said that lead me to my conclusion to rest my case. When asked, Joyce said to a friend in a cafe, it is not I who am writing this crazy book. It is you and you and you and that man over there and that girl in the next table. So he's not making the content. He's saying, oh, these other people are making this content. Yeah, right. And then the line on page 497 is, his producers, are they not his consumers? This led McLuhan to update mid-career his most known aphorism, the medium is the message, to the user is the content. So once the artist creates their art, it's no longer theirs. The user can do whatever they want. So Tim, we'll start with you. A can go off on any thoughts on that line of unreasoning, but how can we do this with no content?
If there's no content, I've been wasting a lot of my life. I don't think I know what you mean, because I've written and I've argued about the way that Joyce, writes a kind of nonsensical book in Finnegans Wake. Sense and sensoriness being the key parts of that. But I wouldn't make the claim that Finnegans Wake was a book about nothing, a la Flaubert. When Flaubert says that, he has a slightly different ambition. And it's the word about that takes me, from Flaubert to Beckett. To Beckett's, it is not about something. So it's not about, nothing, and it's not about something. It's doing something else. So I don't know if it has a form, it has a content, and if it has content, it has form. But the form is very fluid. The form is hard to nail down, and so is the content. I'll use the Wake's own words: plot some to get some. There's just flow. There are the things that flow in and flow out, and we find meaning in particular configurations, in particular arrangements, in particular patterns that recur and we change and shift around. And that's really, a kind of an epistemology right there.
Really well put, Tim. You're up, Roy. Yeah, you said you changed the word. You've joked with me for years about me saying no content, and then you use this word continent recently.
Incontinent.
Yeah, I'm incontinent. I'm incontinent about this content.
Joyce was incontinent, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. Any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I know Joy. Actually, not that we can take what Joyce says as truth, but I think he said I'm making Finnegans Wake out of nothing at one point. But I always think of it as the content. I mean, it's a recycling job. Everything. It's like at the end of the day, all the detritus from the day is left over. Then you return to your own private world and sleep and dreams, and everything is recycled in a kind of distorted way, and things are combined and things are separated and overlapped. And I think the midden heap is a good metaphor for the the wake, the content in the wake. And I tend to associate it with, I always like the poem on The Man on the Dump by Wallace Stevens. I think that there must be some connection between that and the wake.
Yeah. Well, it's good you said that, because we know with poop you grow things. So there's an irony there. And the hip new word is upcycling and not recycling. But what you said, and Peter, you're up next, is I was so impressed because one of our great members in Peter's Austin, Texas group, Sherry, after me saying there's no content, about 3 or 4 meetings later, she went, "Aren't you going to say there's no content, Sherry?" Like I had repeating this shit. I have actually brainwashed her. But then here's James Atherton, Books at the Wake. In order for the globic somatic system to be able to produce creative utterances, it is necessary that it be self-contradictory and that no form of content exists, only forms of content. Boy, did I feel like I really stumbled on a line that could help me. Peter, you think there's content in this book?
I mean, yes, I do think there's content, but in our last reading group, so normally in our reading group, we look at Fleet a lot and McHugh, of course, but I think we mostly rely on Fleet, and Fleet's down right now, so you can't access Fleet.
Yeah.
So it was a very different reading group because we weren't able to constantly see, okay, this is a reference to this, and this word in Latin means this or whatever. So it was different because it was much more of whatever the people in the group are bringing to the table. Like this line reminds me of something completely irrelevant to Joyce, and that whole thing becomes the discussion. I will say also, I don't know how relevant this is to the question, but like I'm reading Melville's book, Pierre, right now, Pierre or the Ambiguities. And there's a lot of interesting connections with the wake in here. And Joyce, at some point at the end of his life or at the end of writing the wake, I think he had said or wrote a letter to Giorgio, like, I've spent so much time gazing at the void, or I've been gazing into the void for so long, something like that. There was a similar line I found in Pierre where he's talking about the world being nothing but induced to superficies, like superficialities. And then it says, by vast pains we mine into the pyramid, by horrible gropings we come to the central room, with joy we espy the sarcophagus, but we lift the lid and no body is there, appallingly vacant, as vast as the soul of a man. So it's like you can keep digging into all these things and there might just be nothing there.
Really good, Peter. Sam, you're up, but I just want to interject really fast. I'm ambiguous to ambiguity. And my main teacher, Robert Dobbs, said ambiguity is a form of human maturity. So, Sam, any takes on this?
It's a very interesting question to start off with, because, on the one hand, we're sort of fighting against the fairly obvious thing. It's always, we've been sort of hitting on it too, with references to Fleet and McHugh, and even in the Atherton book, The Books at the Wake. If there's no content, what is Atherton going to write about? There's obviously a lot of things that play as if they are content, and in some case, you're fighting against the superabundance of content. And then sort of the other way of formulating is, what's the wake about? And this struck me, reminded me of a term the art critic and philosopher Arthur Danto uses, which I think is very helpful in terms of trying to think through the aesthetic experience, the aboutness of a work, not what it's about, but its aboutness. And the idea of how the wake plays with and against multiplicities of types of content is in some ways its aboutness. And Tim already mentioned Vincent Dean. He has a very brilliant article from last year where he takes up this letter where Joyce has in the early days of writing Finnegans Wake, and he compares it to a mahjong game of sort of overlapping patterns. And that's a lot of what I think the aboutness of the wake is, that there's similarities between this adulterous murder case in Britain in the mid 1920s, the Thompson Bywaters case that Joyce took notes on, and then Joyce parallels that with Tristan and Isolde. So a bit of local gossipy news and how that's relayed in the media is then paralleled with something of mythic overtones, and the two come about together. So it's a type of recycling, is not quite the word maybe, but it's a sort of transcycling. The two together created. It's not one becomes the other, but the two become each other while staying also the same. Again, perhaps mahjong is maybe the better metaphor for it, that you have these parallels of patterns and resemblances and differences, and then a sort of continuation of patterns of that gets you chunks of the wake. And so that is, in a sense, the aboutness, the patterning of that. Yeah.
Sam, what's that M word you said? How do you spell that? Mahjong. How do you spell it?
Mahjong. The MAH-JONG. It's like a game people play.
Thank you. And you know, when I asked this hotshot Wakeian professor in New York once, who's the greatest Wakey? And he said, Sam Slote. I says, it's not Fritz. And so, Sam, you just proved it. You knocked it out of the park with that answer. Finn, it's going to be hard to beat that one, but you're up next.
Finn will do it.
So Finn will do it. But Sam, I wanted to ask you, because I like that word ness. I just go, what's it all about? Samness. What's Samness? What does ness, N-E-S-S, etymologically mean when you tack it on the end of a word? Because the about seems like it's almost like redundant. Department of Redundancy Department. Isn't about and this the same thing?
Kinda, but also kinda not, because then it becomes more of a quality, as opposed to, like, if you just say this is about that, you're using the word about almost like a mathematical operator, where here it's much more qualitative. And this will, because Danto is very much interested in trying to analyze, categorize the aesthetic experience. That's also a thing that I think tends to get lost in at least some discussions of Finnegans Wake, that it's a literary work, it's an aesthetic experience, and there are many different types of aesthetic experiences different readers can get, and it's much more open to a wider variety of interpretations than many other literary works. I don't think, like, Ulysses has inspired a lot of artists, but I don't think Ulysses would have inspired John Cage.
Yeah,
or at least not certainly not in the way that Finnegans Wake does.
Or fucking McLuhan or Campbell and all the guys who their whole life is a clone, you know, taking off. But you're saying quality. I just want to interject really quick. McLuhan taught us that understanding is not having a point of view. Now that's a little hard because he's a literature guy, but he hated TV, but he didn't say I hate TV. He said we should study TV. So that's an interesting thing. He says stay away from value judgments. Just suss it out. Don't say it's good or bad. Say here's the services, here's the disservices. When you say quality in that word ness, is that a value judgment? An aesthetic? That's because you use the word aesthetic. Is it aesthetic?
Aesthetics doesn't necessarily mean value judgment.
Okay.
I mean it's a much broader realm of a type of let's say the subjective experience induced by the perception of something in the world, whether it is artistically created or not. I mean both Joyce and Stephen Dedalus go through a whole bunch of palaver about trying to characterize an aesthetic experience, largely sort of drawn through Aristotle. But it's a broad church.
Yeah, very good.
It's certainly not that, like, you know, this good, that bad.
Yeah, very good. Finn, you're up.
Well, there's so many balls in the air now. I'm not sure how many I'm going to catch and how many I'm going to drop. But I did want to say that Mahjong appears on page 482, Finnegans Wake, in the middle of the four, suitably, the four old men, the four senators interrogating Sean, It's Yong of Mahal.
Oh.
I've got a feeling Jung might be in there, because that would be a good little bit of orientalizing thing with Jung and Mahjong. But also, content. Well, I've got a get out of jail card free here, which is to say that the wake is always contradictory. In fact, Jerry used the word self-contradictory and ambiguity as well. So it's always one thing and its opposite in a sort of counterintuitive way. So it's definitely a book without any content at all. It's definitely right close to the void, but it can't only be that. It's also a book that's absolutely dense, super dense with content, and you know, there are quite easily multi ways of reading it, as Sam's epithet has it. But if you want, you know, binaries at opposite ends of a spectrum, you've got almost a meditative space where it's a kind of nothingness, it's a nonsense. And that's how T.S. Eliot looked at it when he was reading it in 1939, when it had just come out. He didn't really know what to make of it. He said, it'll be good for meditation. As if, you know, he wasn't really going to read it for content. He was going to use it as some sort of appendix to his own sort of religious ways, his sort of prayer. And some people have read it as a form of prayer too. I'm not personally that much at that end, but I can see it. I know it's there. I'm much more, and I suspect people here are too, at the end of finding all of this content. But the really interesting thing about the content is that we'll never get there. We'll never know what the content is. The content is not yet, and it will always be not yet. It's always deferred. You know, and it says that from the very beginning on the first page. Not yet, not yet, not yet. Now, what I love about that is the way its own futurity is written into its own unfolding present, and how, therefore, it seems to give us license for it to speak to our present, for it to be in some ways prophetic or clairvoyant or somehow always relevant, or even always just ahead of us. In fact, Jerry, you sort of pointed that possibility out when you mentioned Deep Seek, which is, you know, is where we are. It's the cutting edge of communication and language right now. And Finnegans Wake, somehow, is it ahead of Deep Seek, or are we just making it actually belated because we're belated with reference to Deep Seek? But I like, there's a line, I think it's in episode 1, which is, she has a gift of seek on sight, the dreamy dairy. Now that's talking about the Issy character, I think, or the Kate character, who has a gift of second sight, able to look into the tea leaves or whatever it is and see what's happening in the future. But it's seek on sight. It's look in this place that we're in. So be in the present. Be in the space that you're in. So those are two ways of reading the you could call it the positivistic empirical, and also the speculative and the always suggestive. So in what ways? I mean, I think given that we're slightly sheltered under the umbrella of McLuhan tonight, I always feel that with you, Jerry, and that McLuhan would, you know, he encourages us to speculate about the Wake's relation to media and all of these developments in technology of communication. And here we are with AI and Deep Seek. And I think the parallel for me is this idea of scraping language. That seems to be what Deep Seek and ChatGPT do. They scrape all of language, they chuck it into a big Moulinex, they whoosh it around, and in the case of ChatGPT, they produce this often quite bland, sort of central, normalizing, normative stuff. It can be, obviously, depends on the prompts. And that's what's key. In a way, I think Joyce was a great scraper of language. He had just the reach of the guy with the resources of language was just phenomenal. And so he was one of these, computing structures that is able to scrape all of these things up with his memory for everything that he'd read and seen. And then, does he produce anything normalizing? Oh no. He's got his own prompts, which are going to produce this extraordinary thing, which is always therefore going to be ahead of the kind of stuff that AI is now producing, which does fill us with wonder and horror. But Joyce is at least a kind of little example to us of that there can still be some human interaction with language that will create something individual, unique, authentic. And yet he's saying everybody else has made it, as he pointed out, because language is a resource, is always a social resource. And so that's, I hope I've caught some of the
good.
Finn,
Sam wants to pipe in. Go ahead, Sam.
I mean, it follows up exactly what you said, and the point Jerry started off with, that he's written it, she's written it, all the collaborators, and Joyce has it. The anti-collaborators, part of at least the practical process behind the composition of the Wake is that Joyce would just read a wide variety of different things, from our favorite source, the Connaught Tribune, to any number of books, to magazines about television, and just, as Finn said, language scrape. So in effect, and this is only a very loose metaphor, and it's a very loose metaphor of this particular moment, there is a kind of analogy between how Joyce writes the Wake and generative AI. It just scrapes all this stuff together. But there is, of course, as Finn was saying, there's a not insignificant difference behind it in terms of having, let's say, unified human consciousness, James Joyce being the, as it were, mastermind behind that, and doing that for a variety of different purposes in terms of artistic creativity, as opposed to just following through this bit of programming instruction. But there is a very loose analogy to it. And perhaps what might be interesting is to sort of go through the, let's say, 80 plus years of criticism responses to the Wake since it's been out, and see how each response plugs into technological, artistic movements of that moment to metaphorize what Joyce is doing. Because the AI analogy might seem a little bit interesting now, but that's only because that's the stuff that's going on at this moment.
Right now.
Queen is writing, I mean, a lot of the stuff was on television, The Global Village, and that sort of very much meshed with his understanding of the Wake. Because he wrote it, I mean, he has articles from the 40s and 50s about the Wake before he starts moving into media studies. And so they become very complementary, mutually reflective. But that's also of that particular technological dispensation.
Really good, Sam. So, Peter, it's Ty Cobb versus Babe Ruth. Who won there? Finn, that was amazing, but Sam had to back you up really good, because the thing about DeepSeek is, I'm glad you brought it back up. My brother typed in 2 days ago, who is Jerry Fialka? And he printed it out. He sent it to me, and the dude wrote up a really good thing, whatever it is, but there were like 4 blatant mistakes, like really way off. Said I was married to my sister because we both have the same last name, and there were a couple others that were funny, but some of the lines were better than my PR agents writing my Wikipedia page, and so it didn't say anything about James Joyce or the Wake. And that's what I'm most known for on the Wake, on the internet now, because of the stupid 28th year of our reading club. So how did it miss that? It was weird. But when you said DeepSeek on site, Finn, did you mean SITE, or the quote in the Wake? Is it spelled SITE or SIGHT? Do you know?
SITE. So
SITE, yeah.
She has a gift of Seek on site.
And
but it's,
Finn,
but the pun is obviously second sight.
Second sight, yeah,
So
because
you hear sight
yeah,
as the thing that you see.
yeah.
But you see sight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to get into sense ratio shifting, but yeah, I loved how certain you were, Finn, because I'm certain there's no content in the wake, and you're certain that that's not yet, because someday AI is going to remake the wake, and we're all going to go, holy shit! But I hope that I don't think it's going to happen. But I love how we all speak with some ambiguity and some wonderment, but we want to speak with certainty. So we look to Joyce's quotes and Ellman quoting them, and we think, oh, he's a great bullshit artist like Bob Dylan. Well, how many people know maybe Bob Dylan was a carny and no one really documented, but he's got to go say it so everybody goes, he's a bullshit artist. And talk, what I thought you brought up was the coincidence of contrarians, or whatever that thing is, because that's why Frank Zappa listed Joyce as an influence in his first album, because Frank's main thing, especially for me studying for 6 decades, was how to embrace contradiction. And that is like wonder and horror, you said. How do you embrace both? In fact, Frank's daughter, Moon, wrote a book recently, and she wrote an article to get it publicized in Newsweek magazine. And she says, I read a bumper sticker in the Valley, and it said, or some graffiti, and it said, not all cults are bad. And I'm like, whoa, because we want to demonize cults. I mean, we're in a Wakean cult in a way. Is that bad? No, cult comes from cultivate. And so this leads me to the next question beautifully. Thank you, gentlemen. Wait, I left out Roy. I am so sorry. If I leave anyone out?
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, I something what Finn, I like what Finn said about the not yet, but I think I connect that to something that Stephen says in the Proteus chapter. I am almosting it. I think that's a common experience in the wake of not quite grasping it, but almosting it. But also the aboutness, NESS. I think that that's a way of creating abstractions, and Stephen has he says hoarseness is the whatness of all horse, and in a way he's arguing against AE, who's talking about formless spiritual essences, and going back to seek on sight. I think that Antisthenes said, I can see a horse, Plato, but I can't see hoarseness. So if you're going to see something, and the wake even talks about coming down from the asphalt to the concrete, from the abstract to the concrete, which I think is part of the almosting process that really never ends.
Thank you, Roy. And believe me, if I leave anyone out on the round robin, please raise your hand and say, dude, you left me out. I am sorry about that, because I shoot my wad here. I go over, shoot too fast. This is a line from Portrait. His life seemed to have drawn near to eternity. Every thought, word, and deed, every instance of consciousness could be made to re-vibrate radiantly in heaven. Now, thank God, this is David Lynch just moved on. Moved on to another astral plane, and he had that song that Peter Ivers wrote in his best movie, Eraserhead. In heaven, everything is fine. Okay, so we're getting there. Robert Browning said, our reach should exceed our grasp, or what is heaven for? And McLuhan, which we all should do, is don't settle for aphorisms. Yeah, they can teach you something or incite an epiphany, but reword them or take them a little farther, as Umberto Eco stood on Newton's shoulder and said, look a little farther, stand on the shoulders of our giants and look a little farther. So Marshall reworded Browning and said, our reach should exceed our grasp. Or what is a metaphor? Now that was a joke and no one laughed. If you want to hear some bad McLuhan jokes, I got more.
Don't you have laugh? You can flash that laugh or clap.
So here's the question. It's about if McLuhan is right that all words are metaphorical, then what is the word literal a metaphor? Now you can talk. There you go. I got Findle. If you can talk about the word metaphor, it just came up, or you could talk about heaven, or you can answer the question. That's just a prompt to go wherever we want.
Well,
Tim, go ahead, Sam. We'll start with you.
It's because it's in Emmaus. You got this one, the Emmaus episode of Ulysses. There's this wonderful misuse of literally electrifying everybody. Bloom tosses his coins, literally the last of the Mohicans. And if you look in the dictionary now, the literal meaning of the word literally is not literal, precisely because of those solecisms. But if you dig into its etymology, the literal meaning of literal was never literal because it always had within it literary. The word literal means both literal and metaphor. It's one of those words that it's an antonym of itself. It contains its own contrary. Yeah. So the word literal is itself always a metaphor.
Yeah. Really good, because you're next, Tim, but isn't every word a metaphor, like Marshall says? And my favorite is, you guys know this because I go to Etymology Online more than any website ever, is the best words, or a lot of words go of unknown origin. It's like, well, every word is of unknown origin. Somebody just made this up, but they base it on some sort of pattern. Oh, they start using it. But the other funny thing on Etymology Online is you find out that all the best words come from the back alleys of England, from the hoodlums. All the coolest words. Okay, Tim, you're up.
I was just going to say that I think Finnegans Wake dares us to take it literally.
Yeah.
And we're always, going back to, everybody's themes about, how we're constantly trying to use Roy's word, almosting it. That's what we have to do. I mean, to me, and this is just my own subjective view, when I read the history of Wake criticism, which Sam invoked earlier, the things I find dissatisfying are the texts and essays that just dwell entirely in metaphor, and refuse to take the Wake what it's saying. It always has to be corrected. Hugh Kenner once said somewhere that Joyce took 17 years to drag the English language through an Irish bog. What is the point of us trying to drag it back?
Yes.
So you have to, that's not to say we don't read metaphorically. Of course we do. We have to. McLuhan's right. And it's probably one of the few things McLuhan totally agreed with his neighbor down the hall, Northrop Frye, about, was that every word is a metaphor, that language itself is metaphorical. And Sam is right too. Literal is, an illusion just as much as metaphor is. These are, the opposites. And in Finnegans Wake, all opposites meet each other. So I think we strive always to try to read, or I do, and I think readers that I respect, like the company I'm in here, try to somehow marry a literal sensibility, as literal as we can get, with an appreciation of metaphoricity.
Tim, I go along with Groucho and George Carlin. I'd never be a member of a group that would have me as a member of that group. So excuse me, but no, that was beautiful. Roy and Peter, unless you guys want to weigh in on this metaphor line.
Well, you want to go, Peter?
It's heaven and metaphor. It's both.
Sure. So what I'm thinking of in regards to this is Ezra Pound's reaction to the Wake. And he had used this phrase circumambient peripherization, which I love. And I think about it a lot when we're reading the Wake, because it captures so well. I mean, it's got the roundness of peripherization, but it's like you're circling around and not directly pinpointing the referent of the word you're using. Like whatever words you're using, you're not. He's never being literal. He's expanding what the signified could be from that signifier. And Pound, he was so interested in money, right? He had all these financial theories and everything. And his father was he worked at the Philadelphia Mint. And so Pound was always so interested in currency and these things, but especially when it comes to language. Like he liked language that, this word should only have this meaning or a few other meanings. Whereas with Joyce, he tweaks the word so that the possible reference and signifies just explode. And I've always been interested in how Ezra Pound just hated the wake.
Only a new cure for the clap. Yeah, would be worth it.
I tell my students,
say it again, Roy, and then Sam. Say it again, Roy.
Isn't it part of the first part of the sentence? Only a new cure for the clap could be worth all of this circumambient.
Right. And that line is in the wake as one of the titles of the Untitled Manifesto. A new cure for an old clap. Yeah. I tell my students that if Ezra Pound is criticizing you for being too ambiguous, you might want to rethink some of your life choices. The Pound sort of criticism, antagonism is interesting, especially if you consider the role, this thing called Basic English played for both Joyce and for Pound. This is the era of Esperanto and so on, the ideas of having a universal language, and Basic English was one of them. It was English simplified to 700 words and with regularized grammar. It was masterminded by an English linguist, C.K. Ogden, so that you could put the whole language on a sheet of paper, vocabulary on one side, technical stuff on grammar on the other. Pound loved this. And one of the things Ogden had was that technical disciplines could get a vocabulary supplement of 50 words for terminology and for jargon. And so Pound wrote Ogden saying, could literature get this 50-word supplement, just for literary words? But he had this line that Basic English could be a good test for literature, that if something could be translated into Basic English, that would prove that it was really literary. And I think that what's motivating him is a kind of agon against Joyce, that, look at this bullshit you can't translate to Basic English. And I think that's behind why Joyce did translate a portion of the Wake into Basic English as a kind of riposte against Pound, to show that, yes, this can be literary according to your own crazy methodology.
Yeah, Finn, before you go, that's why Frank Lloyd Wright gave Jay-Z a copy of The Wake, because it's just like the same thing as rapping. Come on, man. Okay, Finn, you were going to add something.
No, all I was going to say was that it was translated into Basic English in like 1928 with C.K. Ogden's help. That's all. I was just going to say that, but then Sam said it himself.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, Pound is... in some ways, it's odd. Peter's right. It's surprising that Pound is so reactionary. But on the other hand, if you look at another, playful, intelligent, linguistically sensitive writer like Nabokov, who took every possible shot at Finnegans Wake he could, renamed it everything like, in every novel he has a shot, his standard targets, Freud, Finnegans Wake, a few other things, communism. Finnegans Wake gets called things like Winnipeg Lake in one of his books, and he scorned it entirely. Now, I think what both of those are symptomatic of is a desire for mastery, because that's aesthetically, it's key to the aesthetics of Pound and to Nabokov. Pound talks about the Confucian Qing Ming, the right word. Nabokov wants that too, a kind of precision and control, and that might be a difference too between the reader of Ulysses, if you want to go back to the difference between the, Joycean and the Wakean, is that I think there was a time when Joyce was for that. But slowly he began to allow a greater and greater freedom to his art and to his readers. So I think you have to give up the sense of mastery if you're going to come to Finnegans Wake seriously. Octavio Paz says somewhere that the difference between reading a literary text and a non-literary text if you're reading what you call a non-literary text, like a restaurant menu or something like that, a bank notification, you expect that you will understand it totally. There will be no ambiguity. There will be no misunderstanding. Whereas if you're going to read a text that you grant a sort of literary value or meaning to, you have to surrender the notion that you will totally understand it.
Yeah. Hold on, Roy. Roy and then Finn, but just a quickie. Winnipeg Lake is Nabokov's made-up word? Because do you know McLuhan's a Winnipegian? Most people haven't studied that Marshall came out of Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And so that was funny. Winnipeg Lake. Okay, Roy and then Finn. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think Nabokov said, we're talking about Finnegans Wake, the snoring you hear is from the other room. I think that's. But I just had one thing to say about I thought heaven was a place where nothing ever happened. That's my vision of heaven.
Yeah,
David Byrne. But as far as the literal and the figurative go, Kenner has a great analysis of the beginning of The Dead, where it says Lily, the caretaker's daughter, was literally run off her feet, and he takes that as a kind of example of the Uncle Charles principle, where the character that's described kind of creates the narrative voice, and so it's something that Lily might have said, that she's literally run off her feet. It's not literally.
Yeah, well, that's funny you said David Byrne, because I went up to David Byrne at art opening once to ask him if he ever read Finnegans Wake. And I asked him first, you ever read the first chapter in McLuhan's first book? And we started talking about that. And then all of a sudden he was swamped with people, and I didn't get to ask him if he ever read Finnegans Wake. So that's like Harold Bloom saying, yeah, we didn't read books, we read lyrics. Okay, Finn, what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to stand up for the simplicity and clarity as a literary value, as well as ambiguity. And that even though The Wake isn't in that bag,
well, they're parts. They're parts.
The Wake has kind of, with its siren song, has lured us onto the delicious rocks of ambiguity as the ultimately ambiguous.
Are you being metaphorical?
No, literally not.
The delicious rock sounds like a mixed metaphor, but okay.
Definitely lured onto the delicious. Exactly. Well,
cancelled.
Yeah, pineapple rock.
Pineapple rock. There.
Yeah. So that's all. That's all. And maybe sometimes The Wake is quite simple. I'm struggling to think when it is, but we move towards the end, the last book, and we tend to think it's dawn, and sort of by doing that, it does help. Even though the dawn is metaphorical, it's still, light is coming, and all of the different metaphorical meanings of light are there. But actually, that's. So I'm using my get out of jail card free card again by saying that simplicity and ambiguity can coexist, and that the literal and the metaphorical can coexist, as it does when something like book 4 comes along.
You mean my whole fallacy is wrong? Well, Sam, I know you got some to add, but look at it. I was raised a idiot. I didn't learn how to read, but I snuck by because I learned how to ask my dad how to fill out homework right, and got good grades, and bullshit my way through academia. And then they go, you run a reading club and you can't read? Yeah, it's Finnegans Wake. There's nothing to me more true than Finnegans Wake being read out loud with a group of people. I mean, to me, that is the essence of life. And when you do it really good, like in Dublin on Sweeney's, where you just go for an hour with no talk, it is like magical, because the people walk in and they don't know what they're doing. So like 50% of the readers just walk in and go, here, you want to read some Joyce? And they go, okay. And so they're not like us. We know what we're doing when we're in a reading club. I wanted to go into that, but Sam, you were going to add something. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, there are definitely phrases, sentences in The Wake that, sort of taken in isolation, are shockingly conventional English, even sort of simplistic and pellucid in form. I think one of the key lines, it's in the penultimate page. It's just brutally simple, but I think it gains its sense and its meaning by coming after 626 pages of, let us just say, linguistic murk and muck that you have to wade through. That gives it a certain degree of force. First we feel, then we fall, which is, in effect, you start to understand that as perhaps the plot summary of every individual human life, taken individually, but also collectively. First we feel, then we fall. And it becomes powerful by being where it is. So it's sort of the simplicity playing off and against other stuff.
Yeah, and Sam, literally, hold on, Tim, 1 second. I love to say, Sam Slote, the greatest Joycean alive, told me the best line is first we feel, then we fall. No, I think it was first we fall, then we feel. Well, it doesn't matter. You can do it either way, because really, I love mixing it up and never knowing, because after you fall, then you learn from your fall to feel. That's what McLuhan got from the wake. That's why he broke the Wakean code. He broke the code by saying we turn breakdowns into breakthroughs. What did Joyce do? He couldn't be Shakespeare, so he wanted to be Ibsen. He couldn't be a singer, so he wrote a book that's a hootenanny. He couldn't see, so he wrote a book that you have to hear. So he was the ultimate at turning breakdowns into breakthroughs. And one other quickie thing, Tim, if you can remember, hold on. You bringing up Kenner was brilliant, because the Peter came to our reading group and I says, well, you should read Pound Era by Kenner. And I was like, I never read it. I just know you're supposed to read it. And so Peter says, I read it. And so thank you, Peter, for doing that. Tim, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it was just the words quoted by the greatest Joyce in the world there a minute ago.
Tim and Finn will never let me live that down.
Probably not.
We're not worthy. We're not worthy.
But Eliot said, and McLuhan said it too, and other people have said it, and I've said it enough times to my students, I'm sure. When we read, say, a poem, for example, we feel it first, and then we seek to understand it. So if we look at it that way, I mean, first of all, you think of the word aesthetic, Sam mentioned earlier too. Aesthetic doesn't mean, as it's conventionally assumed to mean, beauty. It means feeling.
Yeah.
The opposite of aesthetic is not ugly. The opposite of aesthetic is anesthetic, to have no feeling. And the entire enterprise of modernism, including Joyce, was to aesthetize, as opposed to anesthetize, the world and literature, broadly put, to make people feel again if they could. Pounds that only emotion endures. But going back to the line about first we feel, then we fall, isn't it odd to think that you first react to the wake with feeling, but then when you try to understand it, that's synonymous with falling? Which means, I guess, all of us are quite fallen.
Yeah. But look,
when
at
you
that.
really feel for a woman, you fall for her.
When you go for a woman,
Phoenix culprit.
After you feel her first, Roy? I don't know. But okay.
I'm not going to get into details there.
I don't know.
Okay. But sorry, Sam, I don't mean you guys are all the greatest Joyceans and Wakeans, and I appreciate your time here. But it is fun because next year we'll have this same meeting and it will be hot oil mud wrestling instead of a Zoom. And so Eliot said, Tim, poetry can communicate before it's understood. And so this is what we have done is I'm trying to figure out, I just had this revelation in the last year. Did Joyce discover and invent the Finnegans Wake Reading Club 10 years before his book came out? Is that book that came out in 29 basically him presaging? So all these people, he's like, oh no, because back to what Peter Quadrino was saying, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, that's all in the wake. Did he know this? And I'm one who says, Ted Nugent's in the wake, or, this or that's in the wake, and people like, don't do that. They don't, some waking, I think John Gordon, when I interviewed him, he said, no, blah, you can't, and I understand that. That's fine. But this idea, when you go to Finnegans Wake reading clubs, it's amazing how we veer off on everything that's current, and it becomes what Marshall said so brilliantly. The great American novel is the front page of the newspaper. So you know what it is now? The great American novel is the thumbnail on YouTube. Joyceans bombshell and reveal the real truth. That's what, whatever our thumbnail is, instead of like 6 guys just going, we got to have like some sort of thumbnail. That's what it all is that catch line that comes up throughout Finnegans Wake reading club. So basically, let's just go round robin. Okay, Roy, you can start.
Well, I just wanted to respond to one thing you said where
go ahead
about effects precede causes. What Finn said about John of Mayo. That also goes on to his Yoko hat. So he predicted John and Yoko way before they
Oh yeah, no, that's that. Most of you know this. Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye says in the book, when you're reading a book, it feels like the author is your friend, if you're really relating. The guy who shot John Lennon carried a copy of Finnegans Wake. Carried a copy of Catcher in the Rye in his back pocket. John Lennon in the $100 Beatles book says, when I was reading Finnegans Wake, it felt as though I was talking to a friend. Now that's like, so what? It's coincidence, or is that some sort of cosmic connection? Who knows? It doesn't matter. The thing that matters to me is, why do you guys participate in Finnegans Wake reading clubs? I mean, and it's obvious, not the obvious, the hidden psychic effects of this thing. Like when I was interviewed by the New York Times, I says, well, Joyce insisted that you read the Wake out loud with a group of people. And she goes, where? And I goes, I don't know. You look it up, And then what did she say, Peter? She said something like, he allegedly said this. It's like, so you guys probably know he said something like that. But is this true that Joyce really anticipated, let's have Finnegans Wake reading clubs 10 years before the book came out? And just the phenomenon of Finnegans Wake reading clubs, did it start with T.S. Eliot in 47 in New York, or who knows? Anybody? Roy, did you want to start? Okay, go ahead, Finn.
Yeah, so I think the examination round is incamination for factification of a work in progress is a reading group producing essays about the work in progress, and it came out in 1929, and there were 12 contributors, 12 being the number of the customers in the pub in Finnegans Wake, and also readers of the book, and also apostles, taking the message forward, which is part of what reading groups do too. And obviously there is that kind of holy book tradition of reading groups gathering around the text and transmitting it, disseminating it through their reading group. So undoubtedly, Joyce predicted that and set up the circumstances for it by having people write criticism before the book was even finished, and then characterizing them inside the book itself, calling them beautiful phrase, "Be minded of us poor 12 o'clock scholars out here in the cockpit," or something like that. It was just wonderful. 12 o'clock scholars. It's lovely image.
But there's also the thing, because there's an aspect of Joyce that's a little bit like Ralph Cramden, or for Finn's benefit, Del Boy. He's a bit of like, he has these crazy entrepreneurial ideas like, ooh, I'll sell tweed in Trieste. I'll open a cinema in Dublin. The examination is sort of that flavor of Joyce, at least a little bit, that there's some, because it's being serialized, so there are parts of it that are appearing, and it's not getting good attention. There are people being very critical of it. So he, in effect, hires these people to write these essays to defend the wake. And one of the ways why the examination is not a reading group is that none of the essays are talking to each other. It's you write about this, you write about that. And what it also turns out that they're none of some of their quote defenses of the work in progress aren't sincere. Like Stuart Gilbert, who wrote the volume XX. Well, actually, I guess that was after his examination essay. But Stuart Gilbert, it writes that, well, people are complaining this doesn't make sense. Everything here makes perfect sense. This is all explainable. If you then compare what he writes about it in his diary, he's a very, very different attitude towards it. Like, this is nonsense what he's doing. How can anyone be expected to figure it out? So it's as if he's trying to sort of persuade himself in that essay. So I think the examination essays are, Tim edited that brilliant collection on re-examining the examination, that some of the essays are quite insightful. Some of them sort of aren't. And I think that ultimately the examination kind of falls a little flat, precisely because it's not a reading group, that they're not talking to each other. They're not trying to sort of negotiate their insights and their blindness together. They're just sort of, they're working on points that they've been programmed to respond to.
Yeah, Sam, that reminds me of Subgenius going, pull the wool over your own eyes. Like, a self MK Ultra. But anybody want to weigh in on this? Because we can move on. It's more like, then who did say we have to read it out loud with a group of people? And is that, and this will throw in another angle, is that Ellman saying, we're learning to be James Joyce's contemporaries? So if we read it out loud with a group of people in the present era we're at, what is that doing to us? Okay, Roy, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a case of opposite coincidence of opposites, because here comes everybody. You would think everybody should read this book together in one giant reading group. But then he also says he's writing for the ideal reader suffering from the ideal insomnia. Like in the middle of the night, you're so completely alone, and maybe that's really the ideal time to read or think about the way.
No, it's Roy. It's you going, I'll read it really slow. Figure this out.
I can't get any slow. But the thing about reading it, I know he did. He said when someone asked him, well, what are the different meanings of this passage? It's not it's just meant to be pleasing to the ear. It's not meant to have all these levels of meaning. But then he also said every line should have 7 meanings. So you have to take what he says with a grain of salt, I think.
Yeah, before you hit your tequila. Okay, anybody want to weigh in? Go ahead, Tim.
I've said this before, so forgive me if I'm boring anybody with this, but I've always said, the classic desert island question, what would you take to read? And my answer is, well, it depends. If I'm alone, I want Ulysses. And if I have other people, I want Finnegans Wake.
Yeah.
And there is a sense somehow in those texts, like Ulysses is still a novel. I realize I'm going to incidentally provoke Finn here, and I don't mean to. But I don't know that Finnegans Wake isn't. Whatever it is, it demands more time than I have, to use Roy's slow reading. I need other people to help me because I don't speak Polish, for example. Or that people will pronounce a passage differently than I might, and by hearing it will open something else. Now, that's not to say, to go back to Sam's refraction of Finn's point about the examination being a discussion, that's not to say that when we have a discussion like this one or any other, that we all know what the hell we're talking about. Yeah. Finnegans Wake is full of mishearings over and over again, that one voice will say something and another voice will mishear it or mistranslate it or reappropriate it in a different way. That in some ways parodies what we're trying to do, but at the same time it shows that we can't help but multiply meanings just by multiplying voices, and that can be frustrating, but it can also be exciting.
Yeah, Tim, that's alchemy. So I use the example of Frank Zappa and Preston Sturgis. They both took 2 unknown things, put them together, and came up with a third unknown thing. That's tertium quid. Then their key was, and they might not have known they were doing this or really consciously, they satirized their new invention, their new revelation. That's what Joyce did. He put two things together, or more than two, but he was an alchemist and came up with a third unknown thing. Did Joyce know that he was doing this? He was just doing it. Of course he had confidence, but he was just doing it, like mixing, like a brew, a soup, and then hoping it would come out good. And so that was a good example of alchemy, I thought. But anybody want to weigh in on Finnegans Wake reading clubs? Go ahead, Peter.
I just have one kind of like a footnote to add to the discussion, which is it's kind of like a great what if, because Joyce, after the examination book, he wanted another book to be made like that. I'll be curious to hear from you guys if you know more of the details on this, but I think he had been gathering like a mathematician, an engineer, something like that, and he really wanted to make this book, but apparently our examination sold so poorly that there was no interest in publishing it.
True or false? Anybody? Okay.
Yeah, it's true. And I think he wanted somebody to write about the humor of it.
That's right.
And he couldn't find anyone to do that. I think he wanted somebody to write about the chemistry of it, or alchemy. And then there was one other that was named, which I can't remember, and then there was one that he hadn't decided on. But he was again mapping the structure of this prospective study on characters who were already in the wake, just as the examination were mapped onto the figure of the people, the apostle, the members of the jury, all of that. So you've got the 12 and you've got the 4. And I just think it's really interesting that there are modes of reading, modes of investigation, that the different kinds of characters, I'm only saying this to wind Tim up, they kind of represent different approaches, so that the 4 are actually rather, I find them a bit sinister, and they interrogate things, whereas the 12 are just sort of piling in, doing all sorts of different, but there are lots of different models of reading and interpretation within the book itself, which then informs the way the reading groups work.
Yeah, Finn, he should have hired Shane McGowan to write a song about the wake way back then. If you guys haven't seen Crock of Gold, the documentary on Shane, the singer of the Pogues, that clip of Joyce slipped in the middle of the film works so well. You see James Joyce in a film clip, and it's like, wow. And then you guys know they held the wake up at Shane's funeral like it was the host. It's like on Google Images. You can go ahead, Finn.
Yeah, didn't Shane McGowan model his teeth on Joyce's teeth?
That's a good one. I needed that one. You're serious or you're guessing?
No, I'm
There's actually, someone sent this to me today. There was contemporaneous with Joyce. There was a dentist in Dublin called James A. Joyce, and his advertisements, they're touting his quality as a dentist. Accept no imitations.
Wasn't Dougherty a dentist, and he almost killed Yates when he was treating him?
Is that true, Sam? That's
I'll email you the ad.
Because if it's true, it would explain, part of the joke would be that in Ulysses you have a dentist named Bloom.
Well, there really was a dentist named Bloom at the time.
Yeah, so it's nice that Joyce can say that there's a Joyce and a Joyce dentist and a Bloom dentist. That's good.
Okay, thank you guys. I want to go here now. Really quick. This is a one word or a few or a phrase. I know Sam's already told us first we fail, then we fall, but one word for you that is the DNA of the wake. I'll start with mine, laugh tears. So here is, some of you don't know, Peter Quadrino comes out of 3 things: baseball, Wu-Tang Clan, and Finnegans Wake. Pretty good, Peter. Here's Wu-Tang Clan's Tears. Oh man, how do I say goodbye? It's always the good ones that have to die. After laughter comes tears. Here's Gahil Gibran. You can get laid inviting him over to read a book, The Prophet. It is my fervent hope that my whole life on this earth will ever be tears and laughter. And then John Cage, I consider laughter preferable to tears. That was when a TV host in 1960 had him on his show, I've Got a Secret. And he said, some of the viewers might laugh at you, John Cage. So I just wanted to know, what I find in Laugh Tears is that Joyce took a word and hijacked it. He took the word laughter and added 2 letters, A and S. Well, put those together and you get as, which is a metaphor. Of course, that's reading much more into it. Let's go around. Roy, what's one word from the Wake that stands out for you that's like the DNA for the whole Wake?
One word. Baba Dalgarak. No, I don't know the rest.
That's good. Okay, the first.
That's the one.
Dude, that's amazing. You know, that is 9/11. Do you know page 1 predicts 9/11? It's the building falling. It says Wall Street. It says morning. Okay, Tim, one word.
Oh dear. You know, there was an interview with I forget his name, the current president of the United States, and he was asked by some earnest young Christians what his favorite passage of the Bible was, and his answer was all of them.
That is a good.
You couldn't.
That's a good answer.
You can get his custom-made Bible also.
Yeah, you couldn't get a better, or lamer. I haven't done my homework. Lie answer, right? I'll go with. Although someone's going to beat me on this, I would go maybe with plurabilities, because, well, for one thing, it has the suggestion of the tears you're talking about, Jerry, the French pleurir. Yeah. But again, we're back to the plurality of the Wake and the mixed abilities there, and also the plue, the moreness of it all.
Moreness, wow. Okay, that's why I love and really appreciate all of you, because I'm after studying the hidden psychic effects, and that's where you went, Tim, with your intro to that. Finn, you're up.
Okay, can I have a sentence?
Oh yeah.
Wait a minute, he gets a sentence.
That's Billy Wilder, who said, make the subtleties obvious. There's nothing more Wakey than that quote. Billy said, a marriage is more than it's not a word, it's a sentence.
Brilliant.
Okay, go ahead, Finn.
It's only all in your imagination, dim. Poor little brittle magic nations, dim of mind. So it's a whole sentence, and it's just we've just come to it in our reading group. So it's just the movement from imagination to magic nations, and magic nations being poor, little, and brittle. Yeah. And I just think at this moment of history, it seems very, very pregnant and amazing.
Finn, that's what I love about Finnegans Wake. No matter what I'm working on, when I read the Wake during the week, it's telling me what to think about. But I wanted to ask you the word dim, D-I-M of mine.
Yeah.
So what do you think the dim is?
In the original note, in 6B8, it said, it's only in your imagination, Jim.
Oh.
And in appropriating that note into the text, he changed Jim to dim, as in silly, thick, not clever person. So it's a mother soothing a child, saying, "Don't be silly," and then it's repeated in the next sentence, because I actually sneaked in 2. So it was dim of mind. So it's also not being able to see very clearly, something being dim. So it's a bit of sort of twilight as well.
Beautiful. Peter, you're up.
Okay. Well, first I want to add, I saw John Bishop give a talk. I think it was right before he passed at a Joyce conference where he focused entirely on that line about Little Brittle Magic Nation. And he had some really interesting points on it. Like he was talking about Ireland as Little Britain and Ireland as the Magic Nation and all that. So that's really cool. As far as one word to capture the wake, I mean, that's really hard to pick. I'll give you two. So that's all right. One of them is Vico-cyclometer,
Mhm.
Yeah.
which is a great word. It has Vico, it has the cycle, it has the machine, that the wake's kind of a machine. But in the most recent reading group we had in the Austin group, we read page 292, and there was a sentence in there that really stuck with me. What a jetsam litterage of convolvuli, of times lost or strayed, of lands derelict, and of tongues lagging too. And that word convolvuli, I think, is really interesting. Apparently, it refers to like weeds or plants that like climb up things, you know. And the word literally means like circling in on itself, you know, curling in like a spiral. And I like the reference to a plant as well. Anthony Burgess said Finnegans Wake is as close to a work of nature as any artist ever got. And there's some really interesting things in the wake about plants. So yeah, involve you.
Really good, Peter. Then the same page we read it when your group was thoughtsome. Thoughtsome. That was amazing. Okay, Sam, you're up.
Well, I guess I can't choose the word Finn.
You can choose anything. There's no rules here, dude.
Go on.
I'll choose a word in a sentence. For a word, parapolylogic. For reasons sort of like where Tim is going with pluralities, many things, but also many things simultaneously, sort of working with and against each other. And just a sentence I really like is lowly, longly a whale went forth, pure yawn lay low. Just like the meter of that, I just find quite compelling.
Yeah. It's amazing how musical it is. I mean, if you guys go to the New York Wake, you know, my friend says, I'm not an asshole. I'm from New York. We love it. It is so funny. You got to go to the New York Wake. It is great. And there's one guy there, Stanley Applebaum, and he's been doing this for like 6 or 7 decades. And he's real. I got to have him on my podcast, and he's really, every time he goes, well, it's all about the sound. It doesn't quit, you know. It's jazz. It's the sound, you know. And everybody's like the word. No, it's the sound. I love that. So, what's the difference between art and science? So, another great Wakean who comes to our groups, Decio in Brazil. He says that the eye is space and the ear is time. You know, Sunrod said space is a place. On page 12 of the Wake, he says, we may see and hear nothing. Frank Zappa said, nothing is what I want. So, you know, it was in Cannibal Joyce, the guy started saying that Sean is the eye, Shem is the ear. Eye is space, time is ear. Authority and freedom, death, stone, life, tree. Anybody want to weigh in on this thing of time and space? What's the difference in the Wake? You know, the Incas regard time and space as one concept, Pontius. So go ahead, Sam. Anything on time and space? Is the eye space and the ear time?
I mean, those are the sort of aesthetic ideas that Joyce plays with them in Proteus, that the eye perceives in time, that if everything is just all sort of juxtaposed, it's a kind of mess that you can't distinguish. So to be able to visually discern distinct objects, they're spatially arrayed. To audibly hear distinct sounds, they have to be temporally separated. If all notes are playing together at once, it's going to be a bit of a deafening mess. So that's, I think, one way of just sort of at least simply conceptualizing the distinction or that idea of the ear is associated with time and the eye with space. In terms of, say, more complex phenomenology of space-time. That's, of course, that was the big thing happening in physics contemporaneous with Joyce writing The Wake. And his understanding of it might not have been at, say, a Niels Bohrian level, but it's also not completely naive either. And he certainly is making references to that in The Wake. And that sort of, he gets into a bit of trouble with his ex-friend Wyndham Lewis, who goes on a bit of a rant saying all these crappy artists now, they're all interested in time. You got your Proust, your Gertrude Steins, your Joyce. Time's bullshit. It's space. That's where things at, man. I'm paraphrasing Lewis a little bit. But then Joyce's responses to Lewis are very interesting, because there's a fair amount of criticism that's happening to Work in Progress in the 20s. And Joyce takes the Lewis criticism very seriously. And he actively responds to Lewis in 2 places in The Wake. And then I forget who's been working on this recently, but then a very compelling paper that Lewis also continues this dialogue with Joyce, that they're both engaging with each other's criticisms of each other.
Yeah. I think it's a stimulator to Joyce. Go ahead, Roy. Any comment?
Yeah, I mean, of course, one of Lewis's enemies was Bergson, and he had the idea of the spatialization of time. I guess we have a clock. It makes you, it's like you're seeing the space between 5 minutes or an hour or a half hour, but you're not really feeling the process of time as it is ongoing. But the Wake has that line, at no spatial time processly. So when you stop spatializing time, you're able to experience the process of time, which can never. There's always that element of the unknown. You cannot see the totality of time in the same way that you can see the totality of space in one go. Yeah.
Good. Tim, anything on time and space? And then Finn, go ahead.
Well, if Finn is so ambitious, I'll let him take it first. I'll come back.
Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, yeah, no, just following up on it's just to confirm a lot of what's been said, really, but taking up an image that I think kind of really sort of pins it down a little bit, spatial metaphor there, which is the ant and the grasshopper, the ant and the grasshopper. Joyce reworks an ancient fable retold lots of times, and he takes it and makes the ant represent space, the eye, perhaps Wyndham Lewis for sure, and then himself is the grasshopper known as the Gracehopper. And the Gracehopper is given the last word with a long poem which ends sort of brilliantly with, your space is enormous, your volumes are huge, your space is enormous, but holy salt Martin, why can't you beat time? It's just that last line which sort of sums it up, because the Gracehopper is saying to the ant, you may be able to create these enormous structures, but time will get you in the end. Whereas the thing that I make as the grasshopper is music. I don't make these enormous structures, and music is the thing that lasts, and therefore it's the ear which is, at this point, it seems to be the supreme sense, because it's the thing that responds to things that will last, whereas everything that's visual will eventually crumble into the sea. But it's a binary in the end, which is a bit crude. It's part of the duel that's going on between him and Wyndham Lewis. It's just a phase in the process, I think, of the sort of struggle between the eye and the ear. Because in the end, the eye gives us quite a lot as well. The eye enables us to see differences in the letters that allow us to create multiple readings, whereas the ear often reduces things just to a simpler sound. So yeah, just it's complicated.
It's really good. Tim and then Peter.
Well, as so often when we talk about the wake, we're faced with a problem of, how do we talk about distinctions when we mean that we don't want to talk about distinctions? Beckett warned us to be, suspicious of the neatness of identifications. And an identification means, in a sense, especially a firmly held identification, means an exclusionary meaning, a distinction from other things. This is this and not some other thing, which is antithetical to the way we come to the wake. So when we say what's the difference between space and time, we're missing something. The way we're asking the question is somehow wrong. If you go back to where you started, Jerry, with science and art, I mean, this is a bit facile, but it's playing with the terms that Finn was using in a way. Science is a way of knowing, and art is a way of making or doing, the techne. And the distinction between them is tough to nail down, because then you can ask yourself, well, if you're doing something, do you know what you're doing? Or do you have to know before you're doing? And I think with Finnegans Wake, we've sort of talked about this a little bit. In some ways, Joyce didn't know exactly, and that was what excited him. He was making without entirely knowing. If you know too full well ahead of what you're going to do, then you wouldn't do it, or you wouldn't make it. You make it to find out what it is. So it's a chicken and egg problem, or a cart and horse problem. You can't say which one is the cause, which one is the effect. And that in itself is tough to talk about, is how does that not work? Not how does it work, but how does it not work? Yeah.
Really, Tim, it's amazing, because it's back to me having I mix up things, mix metaphors and all that. And Jean Cocteau said, art is science made clear, or is it science is art made clear? It's one or the other. But it is funny that you were a good listener, Tim, that I threw that out at the beginning, because Dante wanted to eliminate time and space, the ear and eye, to go to paradise and go beyond time and space. And so that's this thing when Finn brought up music. I mean, Walter Pater, all art aspires to the condition of music. Like painting, poetry, architecture, everything wishes it could be as cool as music. And that's why Joyce said, forget it, man. I'll just write a choral hootenanny. I'm not going to write a book. It's not a book, because you got to read out loud with a group of people like you're singing a song together, And so that's where he really transcended that and took it into that realm, I felt. Go ahead, Peter. Did you want to comment on science,
Sure.
art, and in time and space?
Yeah, so I have a few kind of scattered, vaguely connected thoughts in response to this. So first of all, there's an author I love whose name is Leonard Shlain. He passed away maybe in the last 10 years or so, but Leonard Shlain was a brain surgeon who was very interested in the two hemispheres of the brain and human history and whatnot. And his first book that he wrote was called Art and Physics, where he was trying to argue that all throughout history, artists tend to kind of intuit the advances that science later on then figures out how to, calculate, put into formulas or whatever. And then Schlain's next book was called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And it kind of isn't in alignment with a lot of the things we're talking about here, like how visual culture took over, like how the eye kind of took over and became our dominant sense and things like that. And he talks about the Finnegans Wake in there. And Alphabet versus the Goddess, in my opinion, is like the clearest discussion of McLuhan's theories. Because McLuhan can be kind of vague and kind of enigmatic, but Shlain really took McLuhan's ideas seriously and argued them really well in Alphabet versus the Goddess. The other thought I have on this is I can't remember where I saw this talked about. Might be in the Wake or in a discussion about the Wake, about how the eye is kind of limiting in a way because it's your field of vision is kind of limited, right? Compared to the ear, which hears 360. I can't look behind me, but I could hear behind me, right? And the eyes have eyelids, the ears don't have earlids. So your eyes go to sleep, your ears don't necessarily go to sleep. I think that kind of factors into the wake. And the other thing is, when I first went to Dublin a few years ago, it got me thinking a lot about this idea that of space containing time, or at least in Finnegans Wake, like the space of the wake contains all of time. All the historical events in the past are kind of on the same plane in the wake, sometimes in one sentence, right? And I kind of thought that when I was in Dublin, because I'm an American. Everything here is relatively newish, but when you're in Dublin, you walk past like a building of Google or Facebook, and then a few blocks later, there's a castle from 500 years ago, or there's like really interesting geology in Dublin and Ireland. So like it's putting all these different time scales on one plane in space. And in the wake, Joyce calls Ireland Echo Land.
Yeah,
which I think is interesting in this in regards to all this.
really good, Peter. Finn, you're up, but it's like Carl Andre, the sculptor, said, sculpture as place. Go ahead, Finn.
Oh, I just wanted to bounce off what Peter was saying so eloquently, a little line that came to mind, which is all space in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Which is actually a reference to Hamlet, where he says something like, I could live in a very small space, but count myself king of infinite space.
Yeah.
But all space in a nutshell is just so, it's one of those fantastic little phrases, because it's also, I think it's also allspice.
Yeah.
Very, very small, tasty dust that you would fit into a little nutshell. But then not shall is shall not do something, which is Hamlet's problem. And I don't know whether the perception of all space, being sort of a king of all space in Hamlet's sense, renders him impotent at the moment of perceiving himself as most potent. It's just fantastic combination, and a mockery of those kinds of visions of all space, the kind of imperial visions that go with trying to embrace all space.
Yeah, I really appreciate this. Has been very fantastic, and I appreciate your time and energy, people. Really amazing, and I'm blessed that you all participated. And I do have a couple more things. I hope you can stick around. If you don't, I understand. You know, I wanted to ask, what's a question you would ask Joyce if you could talk to him now? And I know Peter Chris did this, if you didn't see it on his River Run blog, and Marcin, who's used to come to our wake groups, the architect in Canada. If you don't know this, he said, I would like to walk along a river with James Joyce and ask him to tell me about the sounds along the way. I mean, to me, that is an amazing thing, because of course you want to ask Joyce all these questions. But the thing that gets me is, that when McLuhan learned from Joyce that everything we invent extends some humanness, there's the word again. Marshall called it a human sensorium. So we know knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera or projector extends our eyelid. Maybe non-tangible like religion or philosophy extends consciousness. So what does the wake extend for you? What humanness? But it's pretty simplistic. The flip is that I just learned from Carolyn Casey in recent years that there's this thing called biomimicry, and it's humans mimicking nature. So the guy who invented Velcro saw it in plants, and we probably studied how beavers built dams, or, who knows whether we sang music first and the birds imitated us, or the birds sang music first and we imitated them. No one can really prove that, but it's probably why we were imitating the birds. I don't know. You can tell me what you think. But, someone said recently at a wake group, well, language was invented because we were mimicking the sound of thunder. And we all know Joyce's relationship with thunderstorms. So it's this kind of reverse. It's a flip, right? Do we extend our humanness through our inventions, or do we mimic what nature has provided us outside our bodies? So knowing that the body is the experience in the wake, it is not just the eye. The sense ratio shifting Marshall talks about is when you read a book, your eye is the dominant. Well, a neuroscientist came to our group once and says sight is the most dominant sense. Well, when you're reading the wake, you have to look at the words and hear them mispronunciated by all the other readers. That's the way it has to be done. Not like Ulysses, you can hear great actors read it on the radio, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to look at the text. So my question is, Peter, we'll start with you. What humanness does the wake extend?
Okay, so I actually was recently reading it's a recent book about the wake, human and non-human histories. And Sam, you had an essay in there I was just recently reading talking about the lines that include like forget, remember, remember, forget. And you were talking about memory and how like forgetting is essential for memory, things like that. I think part of what the wake extends then is like memory, because Joyce is trying to squeeze into there as much facts, as much history, as much language, like as everything in the kitchen sink is all in there, you know. Yeah, I think it extends memory.
Good, really good, Peter, because that is this thing of Ellman saying, are we Joyce's contemporaries? What, the memory of what Joyce's history went through? Or as Wyndham Lewis said so eloquently, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. That's Sonny Jim and Frankie Z both saying all times are happening now, all at onceness. Sounds poetic, but I don't think so. All times are happening now. Yeah, right. Okay, Roy, you're up.
Well, I just want to extend a little bit with what Peter said. You know, there's a phrase in the wake, you know, farced with pemmican, and you know, it's kind of pemmican is a very concentrated nutrient, and you know, farced means, you know, stuffing things into maybe in all space into a nutshell, you know, a little tiny space. But you know, it was said. I think, I don't know if Joyce say this or somebody. You know, you could reconstruct all of Dublin from Ulysses, and maybe you can reconstruct all the universe from Finnegans Wake. I don't know. Jury's still out on that.
So you're saying that Finnegans Wake extends the universe? What humanness?
Or maybe it's like the DNA of the universe. You know, you have where the endangered species they put them into a sealed container in case, you know, and everything could be reconstructed from that.
It's like the black box. It's like George Carlin said, you know, the black box was a big deal last week. When the plane goes down, why don't they make the whole plane out of the black box? Yeah. Okay, Sam, what humanness does the wake extend?
Well, that's sort of the joke answer I was sort of tending to is Aristotle has that man is the mimetic animal, and as James Joyce, the Dublin dentist, has, accept no imitations. So it extends that sort of mimetic capacity, but also sort of following from what Peter and Roy were saying. If you have this sort of I mean, the wake. Many people have compared the wake to a computer that has everything in it, this sort of hypermnesiac machine. But to have everything, you also have to have nothing in it as well. If it's a book that aims to include the Akashic record of everything at all time, it also has the forgetting of that. There's a beautiful line in the wake. That's the Lethe Muse, but it washes off.
Sam, so much.
even forgetfulness is sort of washed off.
Yeah, man, so much packed in there, because making something out of nothing, you guys all know I can't pronunciate it right, but the atomization of the atom, that's the phrase of the wake right there. How do you make something out of nothing? No, how do you make nothing out of nothing?
Well, make something of it.
Okay, Tim, you're up. What does the wake extend? What humanness?
I'm a little uncomfortable with the verb extends. So I'll switch
Good.
I'll switch
That's
to it.
what I want. Let me just clarify. I want people to be free with changing words. So that is good. What would you change extend to? Thank you, Tim.
I'll go to a different McLuhan term and use the word probe.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what the wake does, is the wake probes. And if I had to pick something human, I think what Joyce really underscores is hybridity in the broadest sense.
Yeah.
That humans are a mixed bag, and that's a good thing. And it's something that the purists and the fascists don't understand. And if we try to, it comes back to that lack of distinction in making distinctions, that you allow for distinction not to happen too much. So if we say that Finnegans Wake is probing hybridity, well, we could go back to the animals for just a moment and think about how Joyce's prototypical artist is Daedalus, who sees that birds can fly and makes wings. So that's the beginning of art right there. Technology is an approximation of an ability otherwise denied to human beings. But to go back to Finn's generative AI fascination, I mean, I don't even like the term artificial intelligence, because I think really what it is simulated intelligence, at least at this point. Its main purpose is try to pass for human. And that's why, as Finn says quite correctly, it produces this utter sterility of prose, this vacuousness that just tries to obey all the rules and pass for human. It's just trying to get on the plane, as it were. Finnegans Wake is not trying to do that. I think Finnegans Wake instead is challenging our own humanness, like an adapted Turing test. It's checking to see whether we are human, and to be human in this sense is partly to be hybrid, to be mixable, to be confused, to speak multiple languages, and to get things wrong.
Really good, Tim. I'm glad you brought AI, because I made this cool list of words that AI, artificial intelligence, AI, T.S. Eliot, auditory imagination, AI, AI Diamond, the guy who wrote Some Like It Hot with Billy Wilder, artificial insemination, AI, army intelligence, AI. Here's a good one, as if, AI. But now the double duty interrobang of it all is you flip them. What's IA? IA is IA Richards, guy at Cambridge who turned Marshall into reading the Wake, new criticism. And I think your guy, you brought him up earlier, Sam, right? Ogden was an AI associate. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now the other one is Marshall, IA, integral awareness, Internet Archive, IA, illegal alien, and then, Robot World, Isaac Asimov, IA. So anyways, Finn, you are up. That was really good, Tim. I really appreciate you changing the verb. And you did, hold on one second, Finn. You evoked for me what Walt Whitman did. I think if any of you guys, you smarty know-it-alls, can tell me, where did this first come from, that humans extend their humanness with their inventions, whether it's words, language, tangible or non-tangible? Because I think it's Walt Whitman was one of the first who said that we extend our body by, why do we invent things? And Walt Whitman said, and then, hybrid, he said, I no doubt deserve my enemies. So, Bob Goldthwait, you are what you hate. You create what you exist. Bless you.
Okay.
Finn, you're up. What humanness does the wake extend?
So I really liked what Peter was saying about memory, and
Yeah.
I think of Finnegans Wake as extending that curious thing that we do with time capsules of taking a bit of everything from a particular moment, a sort of snapshot of the time that you're in, and then putting it into a box and then burying the box and saying you can dig this up in 100 years, and that Finnegans Wake, to speak metaphorically again, is like an ark, as in Noah's Ark, and there's a lot of Noah, and it's a sort of preserving, conserving thing of a particular moment, which isn't something they're not terms that you normally associate with the kind of radicalism of Joyce, but actually I think there is a preserving, conserving concern for Joyce, and there are even images again in the wake that seem to confirm this, which is in 2-3, where there's the innkeeper, the pub owner, who's taking money off the counter, and he does so with an arc of his covet hand. I mean, so he's coveting these little bits of money, which actually are animals in the text. They're horses and bunnies and chickens and stuff. So he's putting them all into his ark.
Wow.
But he's also gathering all the spare bits of change, all of the little things, the big things, the living things, the dying things, putting them all into one big place at the last minute, because he knows that there's going to be a big flood. And that's Joyce coming to the end of the 30s, knowing that there's going to be a war, and he's going to make sure he finishes it, and he's going to make his ark, and he's going to set it over the waters and everything. And I just think that's really quite a positive message to say to humans about their own culture, that there's something worth preserving in it, and that maybe in some way everything is worth preserving in some form, and perhaps the best form to preserve things is in language, because it's a bit more effective than all of the material forms that the language represents. We don't want the clutter of all of the actual objects, but language is the best, most efficient way of sort of standing for all of those things that are all gonna, disappear.
Yeah, Finn, that's Mallarmé saying everything should or does end up in a book.
Exist.
Well, if you had to summarize your word, what does the wake extend? What's the word? Language?
Yeah, no, I'm with Tim. I'm not so mad about
Extend.
Of course it does. Of course it does extend language. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
No, that's good. I'm glad. Yeah, like
The novel.
Tim slapped McLuhan back in my face. Is like, dude, forget that extend word. Let's do probe. It is really Marshall's main word, probe. Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Finn. Oh, you got something else?
I did. I just wanted to wind up Tim, which is to say that I think Joyce extends the novel.
Ooh, on that bombshell.
Just so you know, Jerry, this is like a decade-old argument between him and myself.
Yeah,
Are you guys in the same reading group or something?
No.
Oh. And this is why.
You guys got ESP, because I'm going to end with this one and then a kind of wrap up. But it is when I asked John Gordon, how has studying the wake shaped your behavior? He said, comrade, companionship, friendship. And here's Richard Ellman, which I feel directly connected with because we were both born on March 15th, the Ides of March. He was born 63 miles away from me. I was born in Flint, Michigan. He was born in Highland Park, Michigan. And here's Ellman. Relations between humans must inevitably have this coloration of uncertainty, jealousy, hostility, and affection. The usual name for this hodgepodge was friendship. Isn't that sweet? It feels like we're all friends and we've spent an amazing 2 hours. I appreciate your time. Here's some famous Russian dude wrote, "Beauty will save the world." So the question is, we know what the state of the world is currently. people, but will Finnegans Wake save the world? We used to say, why don't they sell Finnegans Wake on Home Shopping Network? I just wrote an essay, Can Art Stop War? And it's all about Finnegans Wake as an anti-war mama feast, as a manifesto. Joyce was definitely anti-war, in my opinion, and he was propagating this, the matristic civilization, partnership, as Rian Eisler learned from Maria Gambudis. So what will save the world? Sam, we'll start with you. And can Finnegans Wake save the world?
Well, when Finnegans Wake came out, Joyce had the advantage/disadvantage of having a real publisher, unlike with Ulysses. With Ulysses, the last thing he wrote was on January 31st, 1922. The book gets published 2 days later. I mean, the first 2 copies were ready. But so he had no lag time between finishing writing and the book coming out. Unfortunately, with T.S. Eliot and Faber, he had a real publisher. And so the book, it takes a few months for them to actually get the book ready. And in that time, he's writing them furiously. When's my book coming out? When's my book coming out? And there's one letter where he goes, war is going to happen unless you get my book out now. He somehow thinks that if Finnegans Wake had been published a little bit earlier in 39 or 38, that would have prevented World War II. He was a little perhaps full of himself. But I mean, he did at least somewhat sincerely have that belief that this kind of message of plurality, multifariousness, that this could have had some impact on the parlous geopolitical stage of 1930 of the late 1930s. Philippe Solers, the great French writer and critic at the 1975 French International Joyce Symposium in Paris, made a very famous point where he goes, I will show you the most formidable anti-fascist work of all time. And he holds up a copy of Finnegans Wake.
Whoa!
And there is that kind, and I don't quite think we're at the sense that any one work of art could, quote, save us. We're in a very difficult position where faith in politics has been lost. The ability of aesthetic appreciation seems to be just evaporating. So it's not any one thing that could do it, but a lot of different responses are perhaps what can be called for.
Love it, Sam, because we have to have positiveness. We can't surrender to like, oh, woe is us. Humans have too much great imagination to figure out something. Gandhi tried, they bumped him off. So we can use him as a template and hope that there's other people who can devise something. Okay, we'll go to Roy next. What can beauty save the world, or what can save the world? The Wake? Roy, you're up.
Obi-Wan Kenobi? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if I was thinking, there's a thing at the beginning of Isaiah. He names one of his sons, a remnant shall remain. They're waiting for this disaster that's going to destroy their civilization and plunder it. And so that kind of goes back to what Peter was saying with there maybe a little remnant of something can survive. But if Joyce put all of knowledge into like the ark, would that make him a Noah it all? I don't
know. Good pun. That's the greatest line Joyce Marshall ever wrote about Joyce. Joyce used the pun as a way of seeing the paradoxical exuberance of being through language. Okay, Peter, you're up.
That's good.
Okay. Tough question. Can art and can beauty save the world? That's essentially the question.
Yeah, can the Wake save the world? It's any variation on that.
I mean, I do think if a lot more people started reading Ulysses and Finnegans Wake, they would have a greater appreciation for humanity in all its diversity and forms. I mean, Finnegans Wake is a very global book, contains 70 plus languages, and the river chapter has all the rivers around the world, supposedly. But I'm just thinking about how, like, everybody, no matter who you are, you at some point of your day or your week, you're going to some art or something beautiful to make you happy in some way. Like even Trump, when he's not terrorizing everybody, he's like listening to show tunes or whatever it is. So I'm just thinking, like, if there's some child out there who's a future Hitler or a future Trump, maybe if he or she encounters the Wake, encounters Joyce, that might steer them in a more positive direction. I don't know. That's what I think in regards to that.
Thank you, Peter. Tim, you're up, and then Finn, you'll be the final benediction. Go ahead, Tim.
Well, I mean, I like that we've covered space and time and all of this, and within the last few minutes, we're going to save the world. No pressure here. I think that, well, just as I said, the word probe, Finnegans Wake is not. It's not. Taoists say that when you look for the way is not the way, and Finnegans Wake is not some sort of guidebook to understanding the universe. It disrupts us. One way to answer the question would be to say, if anything, what did I learn from Finnegans Wake? One of the things I learned from Finnegans Wake is anything worth doing doesn't end.
Yeah.
That you keep doing it, and you're still learning to do it. And yeah, there's no end of the world. There's just an end of a certain world, and then there's something else, and we loop back again. Without getting into the sort of human politics, there's also the environmental crisis that we face. And Finnegans Wake can be read, as many smart scholars and readers have done, as participating in that discussion about what do we do, what is our part in the natural world. And I think those are useful things. And so Finnegans Wake, as I'm saying, can disrupt some of our complacencies. I would agree with some of the things that have been said about making us rethink our relationships to one another, but also to the place we live in, the planet, and our sense of time.
Tim, thank you so much. That's so actually resonating with me. As Paul Krasner taught me, I only believe in reincarnation in one of my past lives. So we don't know. Joyce has been here for 143 years. He's attended this Zoom, and we want to thank him for being here. He's in one of those squares that we couldn't access. And that was the line that Marshall wrote to Pound. Needle the subnabulism, disrupt things. So Finn, you're up.
So will beauty will save the world? I'm not sure. I think the world does save beauty. I don't really think Joyce had those kinds of ambitions for his own work. Actually, I'm a bit skeptical. I think he guarded against the kind of hubris that might be involved in that kind of project, that kind of mission, that kind of manifesto. But he veered between huge visions of the impact of his work. So maybe he did. He described the world as a battered cabman's face in a letter of 1934. The battered cabman's face of the world. So, which implies that the world is already beyond saving, already in a state of ruination. So that's part of the slightly skeptical, almost cynical view. I'm thinking about the word world and how Joyce uses it in Finnegans Wake in lots and lots of different ways, and how there's a phrase from the English liturgy which is world without end, which is a prediction of God's kingdom. And in a way, that's what we want to be sure of, that there'll be some kind of permanence to the world that we're in, and that maybe, it'll be organized in a sort of 1,000-year Reich type thing, or some sort of Trump dictatorship forever, world without end. But Joyce takes that and makes it world without end to end. And world is spelt WHIRLED. World without end. Yeah, it's spun round without purpose, without end. to end. In order to bring things to an end, you have to create something which doesn't necessarily have an end. So Finnegans Wake doesn't necessarily have that end, or it contains the pointlessness of itself as one of its points. And maybe that's quite a good way to save the world, is not to think that there's a point to it.
Finn, that was beautiful. Yeah, a lot came up. It's T.S. Eliot, in my beginning was my end, or maybe it's in my end was my beginning, but it's that snake eating its tail, the Mobius strip on the cover of Marshall's book. Actually, there's 2 Mobius strips on the cover of Global Village, and there's one Mobius strip, but it looks like there's 2. So it's that cyclical thing you brought up, world. And or as Pee Wee Herman says, everybody has a big butt. But the revolution, as I learned, was 2 people talking, re-evolution. And it's sure been a joy and a pleasure talking with all of you. I tell people now they can go to DeepSeek and type in the names of these wonderful people, and you can learn all about them. Whether it's true or not, you'll probably get a link to their blogs or their books or their courses or whatever. I really want to thank you guys. I am just a student at this, and I've learned so much. Thank you so much. Sam, Peter, Roy, Tim, and Finn, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm gonna hit this end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Nice talking to all of you.
Likewise.